Today in Your Questions Answered, I have a question from John Ryder 1713. Have you any ideas on how to straighten a buckle in an old saw, please? I did this to my grandpa's old saw pretty bad. It's very easy for the saw to catch if the saw teeth are not sharp, the angle's a little bit wrong, especially when you're kneeling over your timber. It's when you've got it up on that sort of 45-degree angle where you're more likely to catch, because it changes the approach of the tooth, especially in, say, a rip cut tooth, where it actually catches the surface. You're most likely to do this with a rip cut saw. This is the one that I did in the beginning here, and you can definitely see it's got a severe kink this way. Now, in my experience from a lot of the hand saws that I've restored, this one right on the toe here is sort of the most common spot. It's as you reach up, the saw might not quite be long enough for your stroke that you're doing with it or whatever, and you end up catching the very edge of the saw and bending it right up here, or sort of in this area here. Or another one is sort of right through the middle of the saw here. If it catches, concertina's in that sort of S shape that you saw in the beginning there, and yeah, that's how you end up bending them. The other one here is on a saw that I restored, and I don't know if you can see this. This is a very serious, very sharp sort of dimple to the surface here, which has got a little zigzag, and I haven't taken this out yet because of where it is on the saw. It doesn't really cause any issues when I'm sawing, but I thought I would try and tackle how we can sort of remove something like that. I've just got a little anvil here that I'll be using for that and a hammer, and so we'll try and correct that with a hammer. The first step for doing this is you want to look down your saw plate and you want to run your finger until you see the start of the bend. So what we're going to do, because this is spring steel, is we're going to bend it back the other way. So the point of the bend is here. So we're going to grab that. Now, if you need a block of wood or something here to actually hold it over the top so you can flex it if you don't have the strength in your hands, that's a good way. You can just drop like a block with a little bit of a curve in it over it and actually use that with your hands to sort of help bend it. But if you've got strong hands, especially on these toes, it's easier to bend by hand sort of further up here, but right here, these can be quite tough to actually bend in this section, I've found. So with that, we can see, or I hope you can see, I've taken a lot of that bend out of this all right. But now it's a little bit extra that way. So I'm going to come up to that point here and just give it another little flex back the other way. If you look at that, you can see that it's looking fairly straight now. If you sight down it, I don't know if you can see that on camera. It's still running off this way a touch. But it's sort of no particular spot. It's sort of across the whole thing. So what I like to do is just give it one of these flexes just across the whole thing. With that, you can see that it's almost back to straight. Now, I see a little variance here, so you can actually come in here with one of these little sort of flex movements. Thumb there. No, but you got to look down it. Go, all right, that's where it's flexing to my eye. And you can do a little bit of micro adjustment. I know some people use a hammer for this, but I prefer this way of doing it because I just think it's more effective, to be honest. And you've got a better perspective of looking down the saw. So this is a really good first good look you've seen at this, and I'm really not sure how this sort of happens to a saw, to be honest. It's pretty difficult for something like that to actually happen in a saw like this. But you can see that it's raised here and lowered here. So what I'm going to do is put that raised point here. Just using a ballpoint hammer, as you can see. And I'm choked up on the hammer here. And I'm just trying to do some small hits to see if I can take that out. And to be honest, it's not moving. I'm just going to try the ball side of this to see if I can get it a little more accurate. And it's closed up a little bit. So you can flip it over and hit from the other side as well. So I'm just hitting on the high point here, and that's why I'm trying to use the ballpoint side so I can just get it a little more accurate on the high point. So we can see a little bit of it's come out, but I don't think we're going to be able to get this out completely. If you look here, you can definitely still see it, but it is definitely less than it was. And do I think that's really going to affect the saw at this point? Maybe, maybe not. Its location on this saw means that it's not really going to be affected in a full stroke, because you've already split the timber before the saw reaches here, so the wider point, or the timber's going to be wider because it's already been relieved by the actual set of the saw. So as it gets here, it's probably just going to glide straight over that and not cause a problem. If you've got it, something like that down here or here, then you've got a real problem. So there you have it, folks. That's the main way that I correct saws, and I advocate mostly for using your hands to actually bend it and your eyesight to actually double check where they are and correct them, and reserve the hammer with what you're probably going to need is a ballpoint hammer for that, so you can get the direction in there. Is if something is very serious, you can try and hammer it out to flatten it out by hitting it on opposing sides and try and drop those high points. But just bear in mind that if you are using a hammer with a little anvil like that, don't hit the saw line, because you're doing a lot more hitting than just removing a little bit of set, and you don't want to damage any of that saw line by overhitting some areas and removing the set and weakening those teeth. You don't want to hit your teeth. So make sure if you are doing that, that you're actually hitting off your saw line. But as I said, I don't think, or at least with about 20 or 30 panel saws that I've restored, I have not come across anything worse than what I've got here on the back, and I really don't know how that happened, and I've never seen that on the saw line, but maybe some of you have, so do sound off in the comments about that. Now, don't forget that, as I said, this is not going to be 100% perfect. You're always going to be sighting down your saw, you're always going to be making little tiny adjustments, and you really should be doing that with your panel saws anyway, unless you're storing them vertical like this, which is the best way to store them to keep them straight, which is why I actually have the ones down here stored like that, and I've got some additional panel saws that I've restored over there that you can't actually see off camera stored like that as well, because this is the best way to keep them flat. You can store them in a toolbox, but if the lid stays like this and you're not using it and not opening it a lot, gravity weighs on something like this, movement, and you can actually pick up a little flex even with it stored there, and you might need to just make a few little tweaks to remove that. Even storing a saw down on your bench like this, because the handle sits up higher, it gets a little bend like that, so if you leave a saw sitting like that for some time without turning it over, the fact of the matter is it can actually get a tiny bend like that as well. And I did have some of that in some vintage ones that I had sitting around that I hadn't restored yet. They picked up a bend, which I noticed they didn't have when I first picked them up. So that's just something to bear in mind. Getting comfortable with sighting your tooth line, making little adjustments, and you can see as I'm talking here, I'm still looking down my saw, making little tiny adjustments. Yeah, I've got the worst of it out, but every little tiny adjustment makes it that little bit better. And so every time you pick that saw up, you're going to be slowly and slowly just removing that tiny little bit extra each time. And eventually they're going to be close enough, but they're never going to be perfect. No saw is really perfectly straight unless you've just purchased it from the store. Even my Spear & Jacksons here have little tiny indiscrepancies where they've been slightly caught. They're not dead straight. And don't forget, they're probably never going to be dead straight, even from the store in some cases, because they're floppy. They have no back to keep them straight. They're sprung steel, and so the straightness comes from the springing in the steel that wants it to sit straight. And that goes out when you're sawing and you're moving it. Your arm moves slightly when you're sawing, and it puts a little bit here. You're using your saw, using the side of the kerf to recorrect one of your rip cuts or something like that. It can put a little bit of extra force there and flex the tooth line a little bit. Just the actual set itself can make it look like it's slightly out. So it is just important to always keep an eye on it and make little tiny changes on your panel saws. So if you like this video, please do like and subscribe down below. While you're down there, do sound off in the comments. What's your experience with correcting bent panel saws, back saws, any of that. I know a lot of you out there have been woodworking for many years, and I'm sure you've encountered issues of bent panel saws, tenon saws possibly, so do leave some of that down below and how you would go about correcting that. If you'd like to see another great video such as the one you've seen here today, do check out the video up here where I actually build my tool chest and add the storage to it. So I'll leave 2 videos up there for that. Bye for now.